Hello, everyone. So nice to see you all. We still have some folks rolling in, but I believe we are going to get started because we have a little bit of introduction before we get into the main event. So pardon me for 1 second while I bring up some slides. All right. But we want to get started with the land acknowledgement first. And I'm actually zooming in right now from Lenape-Hoking, the stolen ancestral homelands of the Lenape peoples, known under colonized terms as Brooklyn, New York. It is very important to me to do a land acknowledgement of place. I tend to think of it as a living apology and continued investigation of my participation in colonization and my way towards decolonization through all of the work that we are doing. I also, because we're gathering in virtual space, I'm going to be sharing with permission Adrienne Wong of Spiderweb Shows virtual land acknowledgement, which is so beautifully worded. So without further ado, since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's also take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking that we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art that we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples worldwide. We invite you to join us in acknowledging all this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. And I invite you at this time, if you know the Indigenous land that you are joining us from, please put that in the chat. You're also welcome to put that in your name on your little Zoom icon, as well as your pronouns. Handed it over to you, Christine. Thank you.
Hello, Christine Mock, she, her, hers. I'm zooming in from the occupied homelands of the Narragansett people. Wingspace, and I'm a member of Wingspace. Wingspace is an organization of theater artists that fosters conversations on design, strengthens our community, and furthers activism in the field. Our salon series, currently our virtual salon series, is one of a number of initiatives led by our membership, in addition to our mentorship program. We encourage you to check out our website, www.wingspace.com. Our panelists are paid out of our members' pockets. So if you'd like to support these salons, please feel free to send a donation via PayPal. And please write salons in the subject line. You can also, if you like this salon and are interested in more, you can sign up for our mailing list, which is on our website at the bottom of the page. Now back to Kate for some Zoom guidelines and best practices.
Why, thank you, Christine. Also, we are going to be recording the salon. So also it is streaming to Facebook as well as HowlRound. Yay. Thank you, HowlRound TV, for partnering with us in this wonderful salon. So just so that you know, if you are going to be joining us on screen or vocalizing a question, this is going to be recording right now. Aha. We tend to keep these up on Facebook and soon to be the Wingspace YouTube channel and HowlRound as a service to the field. So if you do not want to vocalize a question or appear on screen, just know that we are recording, but you are very invited to when we get to the question and answer section. And here are some Zoom guidelines. Speaking of becoming on screen, your audio, if you're joining us right now from Zoom, your audio was silenced when you enter, but we will ask you and enable the unsilencing as we are needed. You cannot share screen, but we do recommend for the most optimum experience to hide non-video participants, and also gallery view is recommended. If you have any questions about that, you can definitely chat any of us and we can walk you through how to do that. And if you have questions throughout our session, please feel free to put them in the chat. You can direct message them to myself or to Christine, and we'll sort of keep track of those. There will be a section at the end when we have those questions, and we'll keep track if you want to vocalize your question yourself and come on screen. Otherwise, one of us can voice those for you. And then at that time, we might ask you to open your microphone yourself. And then over to you, Adrian.
Hi, Adrian Jones here, Wingspace member, zooming in from Lenape-Hoking, Brooklyn. And some community agreements. I'm going to post in the chat just a little bit about Wingspace and who we are on our website. Be respectful of others and practice active listening. Speak from your own experience. What's learned here leaves here, and what's said here stays here. Assume good intentions, but know that intentions do not equal impact. Practice self-care and community care. I will be, and Kate and Christine will also be doing security in case of any Zoom bombing. So if there's anyone violates community agreements, you'll be removed from the meeting. And we always invite feedback, which is one of the ways we can hold each other accountable. So you can reach us at salons@wingspace.com. We will post that email address in the chat.
Thank you, Adrian. And just in like a moment of transparent facilitation, I believe Adrian was reading some of our internal unupdated community agreements from our script. So the what's learned here leaves here, what's said here stays here does not actually apply, as this is a public event, so it all leaves. And then also a very important agreement of ours is to uphold consent culture. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And to properly introduce myself, my name is Kate Freer. I use she, her pronouns. I am a member of Wingspace. I'm also a multimedia designer, an educator, an organizer, filmmaker, and friend of Elsa, who I will send it over to now. So thrilled to get to know her more through these organizing efforts. So if you are not one of our panelists who will be introducing themselves in a moment, Can I ask that we all turn our videos off so that we could make them all front and center, and then when we get to the question and answer, we can turn them back on to be in community with each other. Over to you, Elsa.
Hi, thank you so much for hosting this conversation today. I'm really thrilled to be here with you all and with this group of panelists in particular. I'll just start by introducing myself. I'm Elsa Hiltner, she, her. I am a white woman with brown hair that's kind of short and a gray shirt. I have been working on pay equity for a lot of years. I'm a co-founder of On Our Team, and I do pay equity consulting with BLVE Consults. And I will turn it over to Kimie Nishikawa.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Kimie Nishikawa. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a Japanese woman with short black hair wearing a white polka dot on a blue background tank top. I'm a set designer for theater and now work as a design collective called Dots with Andrew Mordake and Santiago Orjuela Laverde. Also, along with Chasi and Rodrigo Munoz, I am a co-founder of Sea Lighting Foundation, which is a grassroots fundraiser committed to supporting immigrant theater artists that were affected by the global pandemic. Since this past spring, I have been talking actively with many of my colleagues about pay equity and dreaming about how we can go back to work in a better environment. I'm very excited to have a conversation with everyone.
Thank you. Woo Chun Koo, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, my name is Woo Chun Koo. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a tall Southeast Asian person with a square stubbly face and tan skin. My sitting black hair is tied back in a ponytail. My eyes are a little tired and it seems like I'm not entirely sure where to look. And I'm wearing an orange shirt with a white collar and bouncing anxiously up and down on a yoga ball. I've worked as an educator, organizer, stagehand, carpenter, stitcher, running crew, electrician, technical director, lighting designer, and production manager, primarily based in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, on the occupied lands of the Dakota people. I work with grassroots labor organizations and rank and file arts workers on issues that are important to them and working to root those efforts in restorative justice practices. I co-founded the education, outreach, and community organization Technical Tools of the Trade. We're now closed, and I'm a member of IUTSC Local 13.
Thank you. And Elizabeth Whistler.
Halito, I am Elizabeth Whistler. I'm costume design and technology professional, a large-scale renewable resource and textile artist, an instructor at James Madison University in the School of Theater and Dance in Harrisonburg, Virginia, a co-founder of Costume Professionals for Wage Equity, and a registered member of the Northern Cherokee Nation. I am tall with long dark hair. I'm sitting in a pale blue room and I'm wearing a dark blue plaid shirt. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. I just want to say something real quick about land acknowledgements. That's the easy part. How many Indigenous artists and voices are you currently amplifying? Did you know that you can pay rent? You can find your local tribe and make monthly payments to them. There are over 245 tribes that are not federally recognized. Also, do you know where your trash goes once it leaves your home? Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I wanted to start with our definition of pay equity as we get started with this conversation. We are using the working definition. Pay equity is compensating worker roles without discrimination. So that's what we mean when we say pay equity. And I also want to be clear, when we talk about arts workers, we're talking about, pay equity in the whole theater industry. All arts workers work to create the art, so you also cannot have pay equity without having pay equity throughout the institution or the organization. So we're talking about designers, which most of us on the panel are, but also administrators, janitorial staff, education, every single part of the organization when we talk about that. So to get us started, we are creating art in a capitalist system. And how does the very personal nature of our work interact with that system and the ways that we view our worth, the value of our art, how our time should be compensated?
Okay, I guess I'll jump in. And with I think one of the things that we when we met before and we talked about is, and I think one of the things that comes up a lot is the way in which, especially going back to what you were saying in terms of how we want to, when we talk about arts workers, we talk about workers, that we really need to talk about all workers, right? Like across the spectrum, and across all job descriptions. And one of the things that very often happens, especially in what in some countries is called passion work or passion wages in the arts industry, is the separation, both systemic but also psychological separation of the work that's produced, of the end product of the art, if you will, and the labor that happens to make it take place. That somehow those two things aren't linked to one another. That in its sort of most base form of an example of this, and of course it can get more complex in this, is that we say things like exposure, or it's a labor of love, or hey, you got to do this thing and you've made a difference in people's lives. This comes up particularly in social justice rooted art, like you've made a difference in people's lives, so we don't need to ensure that your standard of living is functional. That's not actually, don't actually say the last part, but you know what I mean. And I think that it becomes really important in a way to break ourselves of this. It manifests in many ways, right? Like we talk about paying our dues. That's a very old trope that comes up, which is functionally no different than the bootstraps argument, which is rooted in sort of this very old, very individualistic idea of supremacy and domination through economic means, right? Like who's got those bootstraps to pull themselves up with in the first place? Who gets to practice these kinds of things, and who gets to be in the industry? And I think that they're so deeply embedded in the very culture of not just the industry of the arts and entertainment industry, but also just broadly, of capitalist structures writ large, right? Like that's so much of what I think we're going to talk about tonight. It looks at how it, can be equated with so many other things. Like, yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I want to jump in to say that how, in my experience, I'm a set designer, and of course, designers and directors and writers and anybody who has their name on the playbill, it seems as if that is sort of thought of as compensation, which it should not be. And also we are pit against each other, right? Because who gets that next gig? Like who, if we speak up, maybe we'll be put on some blacklist and we won't get hired again. Like we don't have job security like normal, I don't want to use normal, but like employees. And we have multiple employer contracts, right? That's how we work. And we don't really know who the boss is, because is it the director, or no, is it the general manager? And so that just feeds into the fear, and also what Wuchen was saying, how paying our dues, and it doesn't become about making a living, right? We don't question that. And I think that's where we have to first question that. Why is it so hard to just even pay rent? First, asking that question is the most important thing to where to start.
Yes, all of that. Yes, I worked for many, many years as a full-time freelance designer in Chicago. And it was expected that I wouldn't know how to advocate for myself. It was expected that I wouldn't have the time or energy to advocate for myself, along with many, many other expectations that came with being a freelance costume designer. And so that I love that came up, that we're kind of all trained to fight over the scraps and fight with each other. rather than recognizing where the argument needs to be taken or having the time to get together and do that. And that's one of the beautiful things that's happened through social media and the internet, is the ability to connect with other people that we normally don't cross paths with that commonly, or have time to cross paths with. And so I'm really thankful for the community that's been created out of all of this work, and that we're all finally speaking with each other. So we can also speak directly to arts management, the administration, whatever it means in your company. Because I've attended award shows that felt like payment, even though I paid to attend my own award show. And then wealthy people got to jokingly say that the arts is where you make a killing and not a living. And we need to stop doing that. It's not sustainable.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I just want to, oh, sorry. Just going back to this capitalist system, like thinking about what the product is, what is being sold, it's the show, right? That's what's creating the revenue. That's what theaters are fundraising on. But that is made by us. That is made by theater workers that are basically all outsourced from these institutions. And that is just already an extremely exploitative system. And we have to address that. So I'm getting all amped up here, but yeah.
Yeah, that actually transitions perfectly into the next thing, which is like, you know, we have all these ways that the industry divides us up and kind of causes this, you know, intergroup arguing over the scraps. And the way the industry pays some people hourly, some people salary, and some people on a fee-based system. And then you can add in also doesn't pay them at all with internships. So how does all of that kind of play into pay inequity, and what does pay equity look like in a system that is, you know, has such diverse payment systems and roles?
I know Kimie has some fantastic ideas about this, so I don't want to take up too much space here, but I guess I want to quickly, like, sort of tagging on what you were just saying, Elsa, and what we were saying before, is like, I think it's important to realize, I think it's important to think about two things, like in the way that our labor, the way that we're alienated in our labor, right? Like the very point in so many ways is to separate us from our humanity. And just extract labor from us for the production of something, and by not paying us very much, functionally what happens is workers are subsidizing the industry, and I think that this strategy, and I make it clear, like I don't think that in a lot of cases, I don't think that the strategy of multiple forms of payment is a conscious choice for a lot of companies. Like I want to make that very clear. Like I think what's happened is there's this various strata. Like when you get up to a certain size of company, I think it is a conscious choice, but that's its own discussion. It becomes a way of obfuscating what's going on, right? It's very hard for me and Elizabeth to sit down and have a conversation about how I, as a lighting designer, am getting paid hand over fist more than she is, when we're being paid in different ways, right? And you add to that sort of these taboos in a lot of cultures, but we'll talk about specifically in sort of mainstream Western capitalist culture around talking about money, right? Which is tied to how we think of money and income as a way of valuing our self-worth. So I'm reticent to talk about my self-worth because that opens me up for judgment, and now I'm insecure about that. And so I think that whether it's conscious choice or not, one of the things about these multiple forms of payment is again, it becomes very hard for us to gauge how we're being treated and compensated, and it's hard for us to build solidarity with each other because we start to see each other as different. The hourly on-site employee, so we say, the house crew versus the contractor who's coming in, it becomes hard to build solidarity there as well. And whether it's intentional or not for a given institution, that is a result that happens, and it ends up, weakening us.
I think first, and foremost, the flat fee structure just has to go. It's it's really by taking on that, we're already automatically taking on extra labor that we don't even know about. And it's really interesting to me because, for example, like tech and previews, that the institutions tell us to be there at that time for how many days? How is that a flat fee? And then of course it creates a divide between, I don't want to think this way, but I would think, oh, the stage manager is getting a weekly, or and it creates some sort of resentment and pitting against each other, whereas we should be working together to ask for a better wage, because what we shouldn't be asking is, are we getting all the same? Like, what we should be asking is everyone getting enough? Because we're not, none of us are getting enough.
I think also there are a few people that are getting enough, I think a lot of times people like to pretend like everybody is poorly paid in theater, and oftentimes executives and leadership level administrators mostly are really getting enough, and not also not paying lower level, however you want to, design team, even some of, the admin staff that it might be at associate level or something like that are not able to, have a living wage. Do other people want to add in about living wage, thriving wage?
Yes, one last thing. I see that, some folks who hold management and leadership positions from theaters have joined us today. Thank you so much for being here. It really means a lot. But I just have to ask this question. Do you believe that the compensation offered to theater artists is enough? Please write in the chat. I can see some of you that are here. I would really want to know your honest opinion.
And I think this question also really gets to, this is an industry-wide issue, and it has an industry-wide solution, and we all have a role to take in advocating for it, making positive changes that make pay more fair, more equitable, more transparent. And so I know that's a big goal for this salon and this conversation, is that it helps to give people some tools and a lot of things to think about, and activates people to beyond tonight. So on that motivation, can we talk about some ways that theater companies and individuals and organizations benefit from pay equity, and what good can come of it?
Well, it starts with pay transparency. And so I just want to I don't know if that was mentioned yet, but we have to have pay transparency in all job postings and all language within theater organizations and theater industry. We can't have equity until we have transparency. There are some transparent wages online, and I'm currently teaching my students how to look at 990s. And so they can, for a job that they're looking to apply to, they can go and look at ProPublica or GuideStar and look at those online public documents and see the budget for a theater and how people in leadership are paying themselves. And from year to year, if they're taking raises when they're telling everybody else that there's not enough money. So I think that's really good, because my understanding of wage equity, that it also, pay equity also comes with an understanding of labor equity and health and safety equity. And that you can't really do one without the others, that they all three need to coexist in your organization or in your program. And so, because if the wage equity isn't there, I can almost always guarantee you that the labor equity and the health and safety equity is not there as well. And it's putting people first. There's a lot of campaigns going around right now about some $25 million buildings that are being built by theaters that are also claiming that they took a really hard hit and can't pay anybody, and so, or can't pay living wages. And so it's just, it's difficult to look at all that information as somebody who's on the receiving end of those messages about how there isn't anything right now.
I really think they'll get a better product, with equity. I really truly believe that. And I'm just going to talk about a show that I'm doing in the fall at Soho Rep with Peter and Julia. That's their duo name. And they happened to be put in a great position where they had control of their budget that was given by the theater. And they decided that, okay, we're going to pay all our artists $10K, and we're going to cut our material budgets to like, I can't even remember what the initial one was, but really low. But then to me, that's like, well, that's great. I can then be there from load-in every day. I could even go like shopping for my props if I want to, like actually make these decisions instead of doing multiple shows at the same time, trying to pay my rent, not being able to focus, not being able to be in the rehearsal room. I can never be at the rehearsal room because who can afford to do that? But for this show, I was able to clear out that whole month. I'm just going to be there and be with them and be a dramaturg as well. It will really make a difference to the product that the theaters are selling, I think. And it's not about the material budget.
I guess I wanted to tag off what Elizabeth was saying and also what was being said earlier in the group agreements. And one of the things I just wanted to note is that it doesn't take malicious intent to make for an unsafe or unwelcoming work environment. It really doesn't. It can happen with the best of intent in some of them, with some really wonderful people in wonderful situations. That said, like in terms of like concrete things, going again, tagging off what Elizabeth was saying, and also looking at some of the comments in the chat, like, if there's ways for us to have a clarity of what wages are, and let me be clear, like wages are not the be all and end all of what is a quality of life, what is dignity in the workplace. Like the functional thing, I think what we're all saying is, how do people, all of us, have dignity as human beings in the workplace and also outside the workplace, which relates to our presence in the workplace. But in that, like while we're working with wages, like if there's a way for a company to have those wages be available for people to look at. So sure, absolutely. There's a lot of quiet deals, should we say, that happen. Maybe there's not an official job description, but there's still a way to say, hey, what does this company pay? What do the custodial staff make? What do the box offices make? What does the artistic director make? That it isn't then obfuscated behind layers and layers of lies, whether they're intentional lies or not. And how do you create that? How do you foster a culture in your company? A lot of people over this past year especially have asked me, what can we do about the culture of our company? And one of the things I've said is, you can make sure you know what the heck it is and then communicate that to your people in your company. When people come in, and whether they're new employees full-time or whether they're say a designer showing up for 2 weeks, if you don't communicate to them what your culture is, there's no flipping way they're going to know, right? Like, how do we have that? How do you create then a culture where people feel comfortable saying, hey, Elizabeth, what are you getting on this show? Do you have a labor budget? Because I heard them say to you that there's no money for you to do your thing. but I know I've got another grand sitting around that I'm not touching. Right? Like, how do we create a culture we can have that conversation? And then on an individual level, how do we challenge ourselves to have those conversations? Because they're not easy ones to have. Like, it's just not, we're just raised very often across many cultures, not all cultures, but many cultures, to not have those conversations.
It's also, what do you do with that information once you have it? Because I have been announcing my wages for many years now. And I will get awkward looks. I will get sorries, from people that know they're earning more than me. I will get some people that won't tell me how much they're being paid, but it's very clear from reading the room that I am the lowest paid person in that space. And oftentimes without the additional labor support. And so what do we do with that? What do you do with that when you are in a position of power, or are you with somebody who is sitting at the table next to somebody saying, I got this chair at the table, but it's missing a leg. What do you do? Like, if we're always talking about that, you get your seat at the table, but yeah, mine doesn't have a backrest and it's wobbly. Like, what do we do with that information? And that's what I'm really interested in talking about, is how do we then, as a group, as a team, because we use a lot of emotional language in theater. So how can we harness that to our benefit? Now that I've joined your family, how can I be an equitable member of this family? How can I get the same or similar treatment,
I love what you said, Elizabeth, because that information is key, because power is numbers, right? Like, we do the same fight over our fee, over our assistant fee, through our agents, usually one-on-one, because we're in the blind. We don't know, nobody's telling us anything. And of course, if it's 1-2 versus theater, I mean, I don't want to say versus, they're not the enemy. That's not what I'm trying to say, but they are our boss. And so individual, there's so much you can do to negotiate. So then what you do is you have that information, you gather your peers, send an email, like schedule a Zoom and be like, let's get together and ask this together for ourselves, or there won't be a show. Like, we have to keep doing these small organizing efforts, because that's what is going to create a cultural shift. We can't do it alone.
Yeah, I love that. And that's the idea of how do we, because again, especially in this industry, so many things are hyper local, right? Like, there are gigantic, large systemic issues, and they need to be tackled. But there are also hyper local things. And West think, especially when we think about some of the gigantic systemic and structural inequities and oppressions that are very intentional against this, it can be hard. It can be very easy to get paralyzed. It can be very easy to have a hard to become hopeless in sort of in blunt terms. But I don't think that doesn't mean that there aren't things you can do. I think Kimia just laid out a whole lot of great things. So, like, what do we do at a hyperlocal level? And going back to what Elizabeth was saying, like, what do we do as individuals too? Like, how do we then build solidarity amongst each other with our peers? Who do you go to if you realize that you got a problem? Do you have comrades? And I'm not talking about like, hey, your drinking buddy or your coffee buddy. Like, you have a comrade that you can go to and be like, hey, what do we do about this? Will you help me process through? Are there people we can reach out to? How do we build a small coalition, a hyperlocal coalition that can then reach out to do other things? And we've seen this, right? Like, we're seeing this over the last few years in many, many places. We're starting to see these things happen and push against that. And push that against that, and really, really challenge this idea that we need to subsidize the industry. Speaking to comments I'm seeing right now, that this idea that we're there to subsidize this, that our work is of value, our time is of value, and that we can build these coalitions and that we can work on these things in a hyperlocal way. That, yeah, it's not there.
Yeah, I think also, like thinking of my own career and organizing path, there's always an individual reason why you're dealing with some issue, low pay, no labor support. And it can feel very individual, but then when you like kind of zoom out and look at the macro view of the industry, you can really see that, it's an industry-wide issue. It's not just costume design. It's not just, actors. It's really every single aspect of theater is dealing with these same issues. And, we were talking about the scarcity model earlier and the way that kind of works to divide people's efforts and, this feeling that we're fighting over scraps. Do people want to talk more about those ideas and how we can be more united in these efforts?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you could. Okay. I just wanted to, I was talking with a dear friend, fellow designer, Dan Kluger, who I see here today, and he said something that really stuck with me. And I'm just going to quote him. And if we don't insist on everyone having enough, no one will have enough, like even the winners. And I like really believe that. Like, I don't think, the people who are on the big off-Broadway houses or doing Broadway, do they like actually have enough or they get, I don't really think so.
Yeah, absolutely. Like and I think on that note, like when we act, I think one of the things that happens, one of the things about the arts and entertainment industry, in my experience, and this is anecdotal, this is just my personal anecdotal experience, is that we tend to view ourselves as a little bit separate, like we're a niche industry, right? Like, and so like in that same vein, I would argue that that very statement is broadly true. Right? And we can think about things like, like stage managers scrambling for their prep and for their prep time and being compensated for prep time. And think about that in relationship with how teachers have that same struggle going on. Think about the struggle of quote unquote freelance stagehands and running crew and wardrobe workers, and think about the struggles that we're seeing with Uber and Lyft drivers. And I think that we really want to think about how all those things come together, and that we aren't separate from those struggles. And the more we claim to be separate from the struggles, the weaker we're going to be as well. Which of course then, I think, how do we think about those things? How do we look at those things? And I think that there's inspiration to be drawn from from say, for instance, the flight attendants and the amazing work flight attendants have been doing. And the Teachers Union in Chicago, for instance, they've been doing some amazing things. Like there's a lot of really interesting ideas to be drawn from those things. And at the same time, that leads right, like what happens then? We've been talking about like, what do we do collectively? And we clearly can't talk about collective action and not think about unions. And maybe you were hoping to save this for later, Elsa, I apologize. But but what does that mean? What does it mean for the entertainment unions? And like, you think about things like, we've been talking about, negotiation, has been come up a lot. And before the pandemic, one of the things that I was working on with a comrade was thinking about something called employee empowerment unionism, which is a really fancy term that sounds really wonderful, but basically what it means is that that the union negotiates a contract which sets a base rate, a grievance procedure, some base rates of pay, and then sort of leaves everything up to the individuals in there to negotiate everything on their own. And it was sort of marketed as a way to improve worker power. It's neoliberal, right? You have more free choice for the individual, but it just erodes, right? Like, but in many ways, that's the model we have, we're told negotiate more aggressively. We're told, like even as stagehands, a lot of contracts as stagehands, the collective bargaining agreements, are here's the base minimum rate. This is the minimum rate. If you want to negotiate for more, you can go to the production manager and negotiate more. And some people do, and some people don't. And I think it'll shock absolutely no one here that if you actually manage to go and dig and see who's actually gotten those raises and are getting paid well above those minimum rates, they tend to fall in a very specific gender and ethnic demographic. You know, and so I think there's this question of like, well, so how do we have those collective? What does it mean then to also hold each other accountable? You know, I think that unions are really important and really, really powerful tools for us to fight collectively and fight for wage equity. But what does it also mean then to hold our unions, who are our allies, ostensibly, who are our allies? How do we hold them accountable as well?
I have to just speak to that, and it's really, you know, unions are holding us back, the union minimums especially, but unions are what can make a great change for us. Like, and I do believe in the power of the union. But I was also one of those, you know, when I was fresh out of school, I was one of those designers that was like, it's something that I just have to go through. And I'm just gonna enter because I had to. But now, like more than ever, I want to be involved. I know that's the only way for real change. The next CBA negotiation is 3.5 years. We have 3.5 years to make a change, and we have to do it. I'm sorry, I'm talking specifically for the Off-Broadway League CBA, but there's so many times where I've been told, well, that's the union minimum. So if you have a problem, go to your union, you know, and it's terrible because that minute, but those CBAs, I just have to read a disclaimer from that because.
Can you define CBA, please?
Collective bargaining agreement. No, thank you. Because that minimum agreement, I'm just going to read a passage from that. It is hereby understood that this agreement sets forth the minimum terms and conditions agreed to by the employer and the union, and nothing herein shall prevent the designer from negotiating better terms and conditions than those herein provided. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't get more. The minimums are becoming our maximums. I mean, not becoming, they are our maximums right now. And it's just not okay.
So on that, you know, also talking about working to make unions better, working to make the industry better, we kind of have this kind of positive and negative way that organizing can be seen. It can be seen against the industry or against the union when we're trying to improve it for its own benefit, for, you know, our collective benefit. Can people talk a bit about organizing and, you know, that positive negative dichotomy?
It's a privilege to protest. And so I just want to recognize that not everybody can do this work. And I'm not at all encouraging that of people that cannot. I recognize some of the privileges that come with choosing when to feel powerless. And also being able to be vocal and run the risk of never being hired again. You know, so like that is part of some of this work. And so I just want to recognize that and say that it's not for everybody. But there are a lot of organizations that will, through the beauty of the internet, you can message privately and say, I'm having trouble with this. Could you give me some advice? My group, Costume Professionals for Wage Equity, we do a lot of private work like that. And so not everything we do is public because of the identity of the person that's coming to us. And so we're trying to help them negotiate what they've been offered. And so here's what we propose you go back and this is what this company can get from you for this pay. That you go back and you say, here's what I can do if this is all the money you have to offer me. And so we do a lot of that kind of behind the scenes work. And so there's a lot of speaking with each other that happens that's not always public. And so if you want to be involved, there's ways to do this, organizing and working together and helping each other. Also, because of the pandemic, a lot of people have left the industry. But a surprising number are still doing this work because we want to see a better future for the theater. We're not trying to burn it all down. We just think certain bridges shouldn't exist anymore. And I always say Elsa is the one that will come back the next day with like Habitat for Humanity and help you put your bridge back up. And that's not like, I'm learning that from her. I just want to like take it down, but Elsa wants to come back and help you, build a better one. And so like that work is happening. And so some people have left the industry, but they're still very much involved in this work. And I really appreciate that there are still people that are actively involved in bettering the theater industry for the future. Personally, I do a lot of this work because I participated in it for many, many years. I pretended foundational wealth, which is not easy, but that is the expectation. More often than not, that there is foundational wealth to participate in this game. And we're doing equity, diversity, access, and inclusion wrong when we continue to pretend that. And so we have to stop with that immediately. I would like everybody to kind of think about their theaters and what universal design would look like in that space with regards to not just the audience. We're always talking about how we get the audience in, but what about everybody backstage? What about the performers? What about the crew? So how can we all participate in universal design, which is another way of saying access and inclusion. And so how can we do that as well? When we talk about getting all voices into the theater, are we? Because we're excluding a lot of people right now, an enormous amount of voices, because they can't get into our spaces or see themselves in our spaces or work under the conditions that we have set forth for many, many, many years.
That was so beautiful. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm sorry, Wuch and I don't want to get like too personal, but I really echo it's not just the money too, it's the practices that have been okay. There have been times when I've been at a theater until 2 a.m., 3 a.m. painting by myself. And no one asked me, can you get home okay? It's the same as you shared, Elizabeth. No one, I know what I am. I'm it's terrible having to go to ride a subway on 42nd Street at 1:30 a.m. and trying to go home. But those were our normal practices. Why do I fear? Why can't I just ask, can I have my cab reimbursed? It's like it's a taboo to ask that in a weird way. Well, that's how I felt. I mean, now I'll just send them an invoice. But anyway, it's just, it's these practices that really make ourselves think of, I can't even have the words to say it. It's like, I guess it comes down to the worth, like, oh, am I not worth enough? And the reason why I started really talking about this is that during the pandemic, I saw a lot of my friends having to leave the country because we were working paycheck to paycheck, and they were also on a visa. I am also on a working visa right now. We could not collect unemployment due to those circumstances. And a lot of my friends had to go home. And I was like, why? We had no days off. I was counting my days off and there were absolutely none. And we still couldn't, when the pandemic hit, I still remember I had like $923 or something in my bank account when the pandemic hit. But I'm a successful designer. That's what I'm told.
I didn't want to interrupt you if you had something to say with Chen, but I think also we, I'm going to guess that the four of us have, come on a certain amount of journey as far as like being willing to break these taboos, speak up for ourselves, speak up for other people working around us. And for people just entering the industry, or perhaps not as far along in their journey as some other people might be. Can folks give some advice, talk about how to start that process and maybe like the multi-generational aspect of this work?
I gotta say, I'm actually in awe of, I don't really know another way to put this, so I'll just say it this way, the younger generation than myself. To echo Elizabeth, I also perpetuated many of these systems and participated in many systems in the past and continue to do so. We are something a dear friend of mine once said is that we are all shaped by capitalism, and in some way we are all its puppets. And I know that sounds sort of morose, but I think like knowing that also allows you to say, hey, well, what can I do to cut these strings and where they are? And it's this ongoing journey. We are all traumatized. We have all been harmed, and we all done harm and continue to do harm. And but one of the things that's so exciting to me, and again, purely anecdotal in my experience, purely anecdotally, younger generation. So I'm 44. Younger generation ain't taking no shit. and of course that's a broad generalization, but very broadly, like we're seeing people who are a couple of years into working, daring to do things that I would never have dared to do. I have seen people say things like, that practice that you're doing of just photocopying all of our IDs and stuffing them in your pocket, that's not okay. You don't get to do that. Where's my effing paycheck? It's payday. Like I've seen people do that in a way that I would never have dared to do. And that I think my peers, I have a lot of respect for my peers, but I think we didn't do that. And that's not to say that there isn't something to impart. Like I think for someone like me, the lesson is how can I be more bold? Like as Elizabeth was saying, like it's a privilege, right? Like so I am less vulnerable. So why am I still so timid when in the comparison is like I have so much more privilege, I have so much more leverage than someone who could basically see their rent money entirely dissipate immediately in front of them. How do I shut it up? And I don't have an answer other than I need to do better. I need to spend more time with these people. I think in terms of the question as you asked, I think that I think the big thing is something that we've talked about already, which is how do you build solidarity? How do you build collective action? It is, as both Elizabeth and Kimmy have said, far better than I ever could. Like if you're operating on your own, you're gonna get a little smushed. Like that's not me trying to be hopeless. Like I just think that's sort of a grim reality. But the reality is also that you're not alone. We're not alone. right? Like there, and that not loneliness stretches across many strata and in many ways. It stretches across industries, as we talked about. It also stretches across disciplines within us. Like, you know, if you're a stagehand struggling with workplace harassment, maybe you're having a hard time finding someone else in that scene shop to talk to. There may be someone in that box office who would be more than happy to listen to what you have to say. And also just the ways that, you know, or someone in development, right? Like who has to concoct some kind of narrative to appease some rich funder sitting in a foundation far, far away from anything, wondering if they can build a rocket to go to space, you know, to give money for a 6-month project that they think was going to change the world. Yeah, they probably have something there too. Like how, I think the thing I would say then is, how do we think about ways of connecting with other people in ways that look forward, that dream about, like to dream about what it is you want, not what it is you don't want, but what it is you want. We're so inculcated, we're so conditioned to think about the negative, to how do I just get through this? It's, we talk a lot about, you know, disaster capitalism, but it's also disaster activism, right? Like we just got to get through this next crisis, and not like, what is it we want? What do we want this industry to be? What do we want our lives to be? What do we want our scene shop to be? What do we want our development department to be? What could it be? What could our theater be? And how do we work towards that? That's a grand strategic goal, but what a concrete, tiny, meaningful tactical steps. Even like Kimie was talking about, like, hey, let's all get together and we work together and write this letter. Like that's a concrete tactical step of moving us forward that doesn't allow us to get mired in that hopelessness, and reminds us that we have friends and comrades. I'm not saying it's not fun to get together and talk about things that went wrong, but I shared this when we got together before. You know, there's this thing, I think we've all heard some version of this, where someone has said to you at the bar or on the dock or something, you know, what would we be without our war stories? To which my answer is a hell of a lot better off.
And I want to speak to, you know, what you said, which, and it's the little tactics. Like people think that a movement will save us, but that's not it. You know, a movement is not going to change any, it's not going to save us. We have to, the individual deeds that each of us do, the, like, you know, the small Zooms that we have and the little negotiations that we do as small groups, that grows into a larger shift. And we can't wait for that movement to happen. You know, we have, like, all of you who are here, I'm sure you have a show going on. Maybe, you know, text your colleague, like call them, ask how they're doing with their contract. If they don't have it, but you have it, maybe share the info and create dialogue, because it's also, we can't be waiting to get comfortable after doing 3-4 shows together to have that conversation, right? That's going to take way too long. Let's just have the strength and faith to just jump in and have those conversations, because that's where we have to start.
And I'll say, like, those movements of the movement it's happening around us already. There's, you know, people out there who say, I'm going to be the leader in equity and diversity. Like, that train left the station flipping ages ago. The fact that you're saying this now tells me everything I need to know about what you're really thinking.
Yeah. There's a few questions that came up in the chat that I just wanted to like, that have been that have definitely been answered, but I want to speak directly to a few of them. One of them was, how can we educate and empower the youth or something like that? And honestly, listen and then get out of the way. Those are my 2 answers to that right now. Listen, get out of their way. Also, there was another question about, sorry, something else. Let me pull it up again. Sorry, I'm on an iPad, so I have to kind of like look at the chat in front of my face for a moment here. Different tactics. There's so many, but a lot of it ultimately comes down to communication. We are in the art of communication. We are storytellers. And whether we're doing that visually, verbally, we are storytellers, we are communicators. And so just communication, I encourage everybody to just encourage communication, healthy, respectful communication, and asking questions. You don't always need to tell everybody what the problem is. You can ask what's going on, how can I support you, that kind of stuff. The way we ask questions of the script, the way we ask questions of the art, the way we ask questions of the choreography, like how are we doing that with each other in the same way? Because I think those questions will get us further forward with this work than trying to tell everybody what the work is.
Yeah.
Because we are all guests in the house of theater. We are all always guests. And so how do we treat that with that same kind of respect with each other? Many, many years ago when I was first starting out, it was opening night and it looked like I wasn't going to be paid or reimbursed. And it felt very real. You should always trust your gut. And I took all the costumes and I stuck them in the back of my car, one at a time. It was the only thing I could think to do. And somebody came out and asked me if I was taking them for repairs or for cleaning. And I said, no, they're mine. I'm taking them home. And a check was written very quickly. Multiple checks were written, my pay and my reimbursement. And I have to tell you, between the two checks, we're talking about $800 total. And so I got all the costumes, I put them back in the dressing room, beautiful, ready for the performers for opening night. And I went and cashed my check. I remember driving away from that experience, my heart rate was up and I was thinking, I'm never going to work again. But at least the people that do hire me will know that I insist on being paid if word gets out. And I went on to do over 200 shows after that. So sticking up for yourself, advocating, doesn't always have to be the end. It can be the beginning. And I will tell you, if word did get out about me, about being the designer that would do something like that to get paid, then I was already spared the agony of interviewing with anybody who wanted to treat me that way again. I never had to meet them. I also, when I was negotiating individual kind of salary contracts, sometimes the director wants to, or the artistic director wants to take you for a coffee and it's just the two of you. So you don't have a team yet. Can't talk to anybody about what's going on yet. I would say after they said how much, because I always ask how much, what's the budget? Because that we have our boxes in theater. Everybody's always telling you to think outside of the box, but we have a box. I love that box. That's why I'm in theater. I want to know what the theater space looks like. I want to know what the script is. Like, those are all my boxes and I love playing inside of them. And the budget is one of those boxes. And my design fee or pay or however we're structuring that is one of those boxes that I'm working within. And I would say, I trust that you are paying me as much or more than the other designers on this show. And I could just tell from body language, from flinching, from looking away, I could tell pretty quickly where I was. And then I could work with that. I could start from there. And it's those small things that you can do if you're not finding yourself in the room yet.
I mean, that's super inspirational, Elizabeth. That's so badass. I love that story. Thank you for sharing. To touch on what you said about, am I getting more of the same? That's being weaponized against us, right? With the favored nations, that it is a weapon, because that basically means that we're not allowed to negotiate above our minimums because somebody else was promised this amount, whatever, prior to you. And it's not in the union agreement at all, I think. Or is it? don't think it is. But I don't know. I just thought about that when you said, am I being paid the same or above? Thank you. Yeah, it's not in the union agreement. Thank you so much. So that's a thing. When theaters bring that up, it's like, well, what, that shouldn't really mean anything. And we should be able to negotiate and negotiate together.
Yeah, I wonder if people want to share some wins, times where they were able to negotiate together, times where there was improvement on pay equity, even if it's not the final, destination, or things that we've seen in the industry that have, just are those small wins that kind of can keep people going and not let organizers get burnt out.
I have a win recently from a student, and so I'm not going to give too many details, but I would call it a win. I don't know how others might see it here, but they were offered a summer position at a theater, and they received word that the pay was, I think, around $12 an hour, and with housing. And they said their retail store where I've worked several summers prior pays $15 an hour. And so the theater company came back and said, we'll give you $15 an hour. They went back to the retail company and said, I've gotten a summer theater job. They're going to give me $15. And the retailer said, we'll give you $16.50. So that student's not working in theater for the summer, which is a shame. That theater lost a very good person. And so we need to listen. We need to listen and get out of the way and remove whatever obstructions are there. That negotiation needed to happen. And we're not talking about a lot of money for what we're asking of the employees to come in and do. She has skilled labor experience.
We successfully negotiated a higher assistant rate at Manhattan Theater Club in New York City. We were first told it was $22.50, which is just not a living wage for New York City. It's not, and what we did was we sent an hourly calculation of what our assistants are actually working, and it came down to below unemployment. They cannot get paid under unemployment. That was the argument. And I mean, they should just be getting more, but then we successfully, the assistant fee went up to $3,000, and it went up across the board for that season. So that was a small but good win. And that we were able to do because I got on a phone call with lighting designer and costume designer, and we just say, hey, can we just ask this together? And we did. So it wasn't just like one-on-one.
Yeah, that's so important, the group negotiations. It really, I mean, it's like a metaphor for the whole thing, right? Like individually, we're not going to accomplish much, and together we can do all sorts of things. Do folks have like a last thought before we move into question and answer section? I know Kate's been gathering questions from the chat, and if guests want to ask questions, we'll have space too, but are there any last thoughts before we do that?
I mean, I just want to say about the hopelessness that we think that nothing's going to change. The system has been in place for so long, but to combat hopelessness is making a plan. And that can really just be calling up your colleague, just be scheduling, that's a plan. and that creates hope. So it's those little things that really start shifting the culture. So don't think, oh, we can't do anything. Like this Zoom, if you share this with your friend, I think it's going to be on Facebook, like, okay, that's homework for everyone. Just share is with like 3 people, and like keep the conversation going.
There's also, if anybody is sitting out there going, but how do I know my worth? Because I would have the exact same question starting out, and I did. A wonderful person by the name of Ann Ruthman wrote a book called Workbook for Creatives, Pricing Workbook for Creatives. And it is actually a workbook, and you fill it out. And by the end of that workbook, you have a pretty good understanding of what your living wage is, what your thriving wage is, and how based on where you're living, what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish, helps you kind of figure out like a 5-year plan. These are all really great tools to have that I wish I had had when I was starting out. And so it's called Pricing Workbook for Creatives. I get no money from this. I just think it's such a valuable resource. And I would encourage anybody who's running a theater to do this with the wages that you're offering. I would encourage you to look at the wages you're offering or currently paying people and see if you think people can live on those wages. How do you think your employees are getting by? And if you don't know, ask them.
All right, should we move to question time? And Kate, let me know how we want to run this. I have the questions from the chat, so I can start with those. And if folks want to ask a question live, we can sort out how to do that too. So I'll start with Edward Morris asks, what is the incentive for theaters to change their practices?
We're all talking to each other. I'm sorry. You're going to lose some really good artists. You're going to lose some good people. You're going to lose some really great conversations. But more than that, it shouldn't be a threat of losing art. It should be more about the incentive of having a more sustainable theater. I think there are a lot of theaters that are coming back from this pandemic that were already in struggle mode before the pandemic, and like really, really looking at that. What's struggling? Who is struggling? And how is that struggle happening? And just thinking about ways in which we can cultivate a community people first over material items and buildings and that kind of stuff. How can that happen? For all the grant writing that's happening, is there also conversations being held with the people who hold the lease about dropping the price of being in that building? They can get write-offs, so like what other negotiations are happening rather than trying to figure out how to pay more for something? How can we figure out how to pay less or offset those costs in other ways? How can we be more regenerative with our practices rather than extractive? Do we need new fabric? Do we need new materials? Do we need, what can we do to repurpose and reuse things? How can we challenge the designers and the creators and those that are in charge of materials to work in a more regenerative practice?
This past year, we saw a sweeping, I'll call it effort to put out statements. Theaters put out statements about EDI and other things that they were working on. But unless these institutions don't really change the material conditions of what the workers are getting, they're never going to get an inclusive environment, or inclusive stories, because who are the artists that are able to work in the industry right now? I'm very privileged. I was able to come here from Japan to go to grad school and have an education, came out of it with some debt, but not that much. And that is a privilege, you know, and do we, you know, my question is like, I don't want to just watch theater that are made by people that have trust funds. No offense, trust funds are, no, that's great, but you know what I mean.
Well, if you can't fix your budgets, fix your language. Marginalized can be replaced by historically excluded. And minority can be replaced by global majority. You know, like just start fixing your language, because I guarantee you that when you start with those things, when you start with language, when you start with words, you'll start to recognize the people that you're talking about or trying to cultivate or trying to bring in through your diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. Start with your language. Try fixing that. That's easy. The land acknowledgement is easy, like I was saying earlier. It's the actions that follow it. It's the show that follows it. If you're doing a land acknowledgement in front of a show, I don't know, Oklahoma, you know, like, like think about that. Think about where you're placing these words and what follows them. And so when you're using your words, think about what follows those words.
I'm sorry, also just the disparity of salary between executive leadership and other staff is crazy. You know, all that information is out there. I have many of them saved on my desktop because it makes me very angry at how much these people, artistic directors, general managers, are getting paid where I am struggling for rent. And these are non-for-profits.
Yeah. And jumping off what Jimmy was saying, like, I think there's this tension that's out there, right? Like, we want to make sure that everyone is being compensated, everyone's getting a thriving condition of life, whatever that means, because that is different for different people. And at the same time, we also don't want to be in a situation where we have basically centralized the ability to produce in the hands of just the rich. Right? That is a fundamental tension that's there. And so fundamentally, you've also got this question of funding. And as rank and file workers push back on their structures, like I think we also recognize that there's a variety of tensions within the industry. Like, it is not a homogeneous industry. But that doesn't mean that there aren't these broad systemic issues around pay, around working conditions, around dignity in the workplace. And so, as Elizabeth and Kimmy were saying, like, there are ways for institutions to look deeply at their practices. And I think that workbook is a terrific, straightforward step. That's very tangible. That's very quantitative. Like, it's very like, does it or doesn't it, right? Like, there's no like, well, I kind of maybe if yeah, right? There's not a qualitative analysis involved there. It's a very quantitative analysis. Like, what kind of quantitative analysis can be happened there? But at the same time, we recognize like that the concentration of funding in the hands of private funders is a real issue as well. And so I don't run a theater, but in the same way that we have talked about solidarity amongst rank and file workers to push back and build collective action for advocating for themselves, that I would encourage those who in institutions to look at that kind of action. What kind of solidarity can you build to push back against the funders that control some of those budgets for you, that put you in the position of having to hire development please hire development staff. I'm not saying don't hire development staff. Hire development staff that then have to scramble together a series of checkbox and words for projects that we all know are meaningless, right? And are fundamentally unable to produce the kind of conditions that sustain your rank and file workers at some institutions that could sustain rank and file workers if you budgeted differently. But I also want to acknowledge that there are institutions where, you know, the pay disparity between your top management and your and everyone else is not that great. It's actually not meaningful. But what kind of solidarity can be built there? In the same way that we've talked about on individual rank file level. Like, I think that that is also something to be asked. And I realize it's a bigger question than maybe for 4 minutes, but yeah.
I just wanted to add that a big part of the work I've been doing in the last few months has been talking to foundations about pay equity, because they hold so much power in what organizations prioritize and center and pay attention to. And so I am really hopeful that there will be movement on, you know, all the fronts. But, you know, that is definitely a key one that is important to remember who holds that power. It looks like somebody has their hand up. Are we going to a live question?
Yeah, thank you. I thought what you said, Wu, about you know, recognizing that companies are at different places in how much money they have, right? Because we know the big houses, or certainly like what have a lot of money and maybe are paying their artistic directors a lot, etc. But I tend to work with ensembles, and ensembles are scrounging already, many of them, and don't even have people to get that funding for themselves. And there's a way there that we can, like, somehow in this conversation about pay equity, we have to be talking too, I think, about how do we get more funding for the arts for those smaller ensembles, because a lot of them are doing really exciting, interesting work, and everyone is just putting in their sweat equity.
Yeah, just a quick thing about that, sorry. I know that not all theaters work within the capitalistic structure either. I mean, we're when we're talking about capitalism, we're talking about a white majority. And so I know that there are a lot of theaters that work very successfully through their own culture, doing things their own way. And I don't want to ever suggest that we're trying to take that away at all through this work. And so finding ways to look at how that's being done successfully, how it's being done respectfully. Is more time being given, or is more time not being asked to be given? You know, how is this happening outside of a capitalistic structure as well? I think we can learn a lot from theaters that operate outside of outside of capitalism. But yeah, I have been a member of an ensemble theater, and so I do know what that looks like from the inside as well. And I do not have an answer about arts funding, but I can say that when I started to value what I did, when I started to say what I do is valuable, things did slowly change for me and for my perspective, and also for my work in this activism and everything. And so we need to all agree that what we do is valuable, that it really truly is, on many different ways, not just financially. And so that's the language that seeps out, that comes out from us. That's our energy that we give out. And so finding that value, I think, not necessarily that all of a sudden like money is just going to start rolling in, but we have to believe that what we do is valuable.
Yeah, I absolutely. And I guess one thing I want to say, and I want to make it very clear that I'm not accusing anyone of anything here, but I also, yes, if there's no money, like wages, you know, we look at how the wages get distributed, but there's, again, as we've talked about before, there's more to a workplace condition than just the wages, that we're talking about dignity and quality of life. And again, I'm not accusing you of anything, but like, I think that there are ways to step back and say, okay, so how is this happening within us? What is that? What is our workplace culture? What is dignity look like? How much agency and consent do people really have? Like one of the things that I think is worth, I think this is a place to sort of put in is, and references back some of the things that we talked about earlier, is we don't have very good practices around consent in, well, in anything, but in our industry, right? Like whether in the arts and entertainment industry, whether it's sports or museums or live events or theater or dance, like consent is not something we're particularly good at. It is not infrequent for us. I'm not saying this that you're like this, but I have certainly been in collectives where we're told pretty early on that we don't get to say no, that we need to say yes and that takes away a lot of my agency and my ability to protest if something's not right. So I think that there's ways we can think about it, or organically is maybe the wrong word, but like in the conditional sense of what are we looking at here, in terms of trying to generate more resources for equitably, right? Like again, if we talk about pay equity and wage equity, we need to talk about it across the board. Like why is all of the flipping money going to like 3 organizations? It's more than that, but you all know what I mean, right? Like that's not equitable either, which I think is what you're getting at. And again, like I think that becomes a big question of funding. I can tell you what I think is the answer, which is more public funding and higher taxes, but that betrays my my political roots. And, you know, that's not a popular opinion here, but basically like, how do you, I think that a lot of the because private funding and public funding for the matter is so checkboxy, like it's so project oriented. This is kind of, I think what I was trying to get at is there a way for us to then, as Elsa was saying, is in engaging with funding bodies, be they public or private, to completely dismantle that or to challenge that?
I think also it's important to note that you don't need more money to do pay equity. If you look at the big organizations, the big theater companies, none of them are doing pay equity right. None of them are trying particularly hard either. And the real key is to looking at the budget that you have and then working within that in a way that, you know, produces art and pays people fairly and equitably for their, you know, their work. And I think often people think that you need more money in order to do it, that it'll just be, you know, paying the same amount of people you have now more or something like this. But, you know, looking at where the money's going, is it going to, you know, materials rather than people's work or these sorts of things? There's lots of ways that companies can scale the work they're doing to meet their budget in a way that has pay equity.
And all the quality of life things, like, you know, I'm a parent to young kids, and one of the biggest struggles I have right now is I need wages. You know, money is a really big problem for us right now, but one of the biggest factors is really like, how do I make a schedule work to be able to get my kids to school and pick them up afterwards and get them to, like, you know, swimming and whatever the heck it is, and make sure there's dinner on the table. And most of my interviews, when I get interviewed to try and get a job in this last 18 months, that's been the sticking point. They're like, yeah, sure, whatever. No, you can just pay for childcare. Like, but you're not paying me enough for someone to look after, raise my kids for me. Sorry.
This is, yeah, actually, sorry, I just wanted to jump in because this is exactly what Una has mentioned in the chat here. It's like, what, you know, we are employees of these theaters, as you know, they are hiring us, but we we pay for the things that make the work happen, right? Like I've actually tried to ask a theater company to pay for my Vectorworks subscription. Of course I was like scoffed at. And you know, like model making supplies, usually I get $300 maybe for reimbursement materials, but I do want to ask, do they know how much a sheet of foam core costs now? It's about like $60. And, you know, I've had producers tell me, maybe you shouldn't make a model. Yeah. Because it's too expensive, but you know, that's not the point. It would, I mean, my argument is it'll probably be the same anyway. If I do it on 3D, it's going to The software is going to cost a bunch and it's going to take time. I mean, the point being that, Una says it very eloquently here that, yeah, providing the tools I need to do my job, we should also be asking for that. And of course, childcare and like tech being on set on the weekends, who invented tech schedule? It's just the weekends, not being able to be with your family. Who is actually going to take care of that? So, I could go on, but it'll get boring.
I've had to hide the fact that I have children in my career. When I was pregnant, that was the biggest giveaway. And so the phone stopped ringing. And when I asked around, it was because they assumed I wouldn't be available anymore. In other words, I wouldn't be able to give my 110%. And then, yeah, there was a lot. I got dropped a lot. And so I hid my family so I could continue working, And so that's the thing. That's why I am deeply disturbed by the amount of emotional language that comes in theater. It comes in the job ads, it comes in the language we use in the theater space about it being a family. But when it comes down to it, they really don't want you to have a family. They want you to be their family. They want you to be in their abusive family. And so we need to stop hiding that we have families. I admit that wrong now. But it felt like survival at the time. It felt like survival and protection of my career as a woman. But yeah, I have absolutely been expected as a costume designer to also be the costume shop. And to have a cutting table, an iron, a sewing machine, all the threads, all the notions, access to the materials at a discount because I'm probably working at the cutting table at the fabric store during the day. That was built in to the expectation of me taking contracts. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to move to another question, and if anybody who's in the room live wants to ask them, raise your hand and we'll do that again. Somebody asked, how do we continue our boldness as industry returns from the pandemic without income and ticket sales? And I know, Elizabeth, you and I have talked about this a lot as far as, the perceived well-being of theater companies and maybe the reality of theater companies during the pandemic. But would folks like to talk about that? How do we re-enter, the industry in quotes?
How to re-enter the work? I'm sorry, you cut off a little bit for me, but
I'm sorry. Yes.
No.
So the question is, like, how do we continue to be bold in our activism while we're re-entering this industry that has been, in quotes, shut down, not having ticket sales, and I think just, my tack onto that is, I think there's a lot of theater companies that are saying that the pandemic has been very hard financially. At the same time that there's been a lot of rescue funds and a lot of generosity from donors and a lot of people laid off that, the theater's, expenses have been down. And so just wanting to note that perceived well-being of the industry versus the reality and, not being able to really know because there's no transparency until those 990s come out. Then we'll know what is actually happening.
It's a hard question because I've been told exactly that line. Like, we just don't have, with the pandemic, we just don't have enough. But the interesting is, even pre-pandemic, the answer was the same. Right? So honestly, it just cannot go on, pandemic or no pandemic. If you give me a $3,000 fee, I am certain that I could make something great. it's then cut your materials budgets, like make, I don't know, do fewer shows or, there's ways to pay people properly with some imagination. And we cannot be taken, we cannot be blamed for their lack of imagination is my only answer to that. You use your imagination.
They also had a whole year. I'm sorry. like if anybody that is right now at this moment saying, what are we going to do? What have they been doing? Especially if they've been collecting a paycheck this whole time. with so. And we also, last summer, we all got a really big memo about racism. So those that are just now starting to think about what to do about it, I mean, come on, you've had some time. We all have been sitting in this work isn't paid. The labor that a lot of us have been doing this whole time, advocating for a better theater industry, we're not getting paid to do this. So those that have been collecting money this whole time, I expect more. I really do. I expect more from you to have taken time to think about this, to have a plan, to recognize that wage transparency should be number one on that plan. A lot of during the protests last summer, a lot of theaters were like, we opened our lobby so protesters could have places to come in. It's like, yeah, now open your books. Open it all up.
A little shout out to Ars Nova, though. They did send out a wage transparency report, which has been a very empowering piece of information. And I really do hope that other theaters follow.
Yeah, but plus on all that, I mean, I'll quickly insert, like, there's a whole conversation we had around, the exploitative, extractive nature of some activism that happens too. I would love to talk to you about sometime, Elizabeth. There's also, but yeah, I absolutely, to plus one what was just said, right? Like look, these problems are old, very, very old. And I will speak for me in saying that I'm not expecting, there are certain theaters that could solve them tomorrow. But I also acknowledge that there are a lot of institutions, theaters, museums, etc., that maybe could not solve them tomorrow, but that doesn't mean that they can't present a very clear, honest, and transparent account of where they are and what they're gonna do about it. And as Elizabeth and Kimia have said, I think that's a thing. That's a really, really big thing, right? Like, stop gaslighting us bluntly, very, very bluntly. Stop gaslighting us and stop gaslighting yourselves. It's not doing you any good.
Yep. This is all so great, and there's a ton of questions. So, Kate, I'm gonna keep going through them because they're great until somebody tells me to stop, because there's just so much to cover and so much to talk about, and obviously we're not gonna get all through tonight. But Isabella Bird asks, how can we help institutions shift rates to honestly value our intellectual labor as partnered / equal but different with the ways physical labor is regularly valued with time-based compensation?
Kimia, you're such a great one with this.
It's so sorry. I'm just looking for the question. It's funny. I have to read it.
Oh yeah, no, it's
yes.
Somebody's in here removing questions real fast, but basically,
amazing.
How do we encourage companies?
I get it.
Say it.
We really have to So, I mean, to me, the tech and preview part is just so simple, because honestly, we shouldn't really be on a 1099 during that time, because we are asked to be at a place at the times that the employer told us to be in their space. So that is, we should totally be hired as an employee on a wage system during that time, right? So that's, to me, the answer is very clear, like what we should do. And then there has to be, we have to really get to the bottom of a living wage in New York City and DC, Chicago, like get that data out there and really prove that these fees are nothing close to, I mean, they know that it's not a living wage, but from there create a scalable system of a weekly, daily, and hourly that can, that we can plug in to each kind of show. Because of course, we're not gonna ask Lincoln Center to pay the same as a show at the Wild Project, right? Of course I want theaters, small theaters, to grow and thrive. And then there's this question of, okay, well, what are you doing before that time? Well, then that should be also, if we start talking with the director 3 months out, then there should be a weekly, because I understand that doing an hourly for all of our work is very difficult at some point, right? Because it's not as if we know when what time to what time. But again, we just have to come up with a new system that really reflects how we work. Because right now the flat fee system does not at all. And this work, we got to start it. Have to make it.
And I love this because I've done a lot of operas where they have a full orchestra and they are all on the clock. And I have to tell you that the respect to that time is so incredible because they're being paid by the hour. And so I think if we were all on an hourly schedule during tech, crew, designers, everybody in that space, that there would be much more respect to that time, that we would get out of there, that people wouldn't just keep us around for 5 hours of note talking through the entire script, that they might be a little more clear and concise and to the point, and that kind of stuff, and make better use of that time. Because oftentimes I've seen tech used as there must have been one person in the room that had nothing else to do, and they just kind of like kept us all there for no reason sometimes. I think we've all been in experiences like that where you're just like, I can't believe we're still here. And so like, it just, or thinking ahead of time, like, wow, that's a really long list of like, you've got a long list. How are we all going to work together to make that work happen on the hours that have been set aside to be paid for, and that's the thing. A lot of times we get into tech and we end up putting in a lot more hours than we ever anticipated, and with no change in pay, none.
And just to add to that, we also have to, don't forget that we should be paid for insight or vision too, right? And what we created. Like we can't have, we can't be told like, okay, we paid your weekly, so then we have the rights to your work now. So, that's something that we can't forget. It is, I really got focused on the time-based payment as well, but then there has to be some, another sort of calculation in that.
I've been doing a little work with the Costume Designers Guild, which is the union for film and TV costume designers, and they are facing all the same issues that costume workers are in theater, but in a slightly different way. So it's like the same system, it created the same problem, but it's like manifesting in different ways. And they are paid the weekly rate, but by and large do not have intellectual property rights, are not compensated for their idea and their ownership, and the Halloween costumes that get made from the characters they've created. Whereas we have it slightly differently in our industry. And I'll drop this in the chat, but they're having a pay equity town hall on this Sunday, and I encourage people to attend, if for no other reason than to like, make that connection like Wuchen was talking about with the, struggles that other industries are going through and how they are, you know, solving those problems that we're also dealing with too.
But also anybody who's still trying to figure out how many hours goes into a show, or for anybody who's in a position of hiring somebody. I always say it's going to be 100 hours minimum for me to design a show. Building is different, but to design a show, it's going to be at least 100 hours from start to finish. I've never gone under that. So that's how I'm able to immediately take a rate of pay if it is a flat fee and divide it. So I can immediately in that moment and say, you're offering me $3 an hour, or you're offering me, that it's going to be a minimum of 100 hours. And so I can immediately kind of do a quick math on, what that 100 hours is really going to pay. And then again, every show depends, I don't, but it's going to be at least 100 hours of my time. And so that's how I'm able to think about it with regards to a healthy work-life balance, how this is working, where am I getting those 100 hours from my life to give to this project. And so if anybody's trying to figure out like, how do I even start? I always encourage people to think of 100 hours. Yeah.
And for some folks, 100 hours is just tech, right? It's not even the designing isn't included. I actually think of it as 250 for myself, actually, like from the meetings to the emails, reading, designing, production meetings, traveling, and then previews and tech. It's a lot, and it's hard not, calculation hard, but it's emotionally hard to do that, but it's really necessary. And it's actually something, a little project on the side that I'm trying to do with my colleagues about data collection. We should continue, just if you're starting on a show now, just take a moment to write down the hours. And that information will come so in handy. Please, everyone, do that, and I'll be in touch. I think.
Yeah, I think that there's an issue, an imagination, right? Like just kind of the thing, like we're in a business of imagination. What are these imaginative things that are out there? And I think that the imagination part and the dreaming of what we can envision this industry to be and what our lives to be is part of also not falling into a pit of hopelessness, and a part of building power and finding joy in our lives and in the work and activism we do. Like I talked about these before when we met earlier, and I have not been able to find these articles again. So I say they're anecdotal and no data, so big grain of salt there. But I wanted to share two things there, which is one, that at one point I was doing research and I promised I found information on this theater company in Finland that had a pay structure that basically what Kimi was saying, that basically they for people, they had full-time staff who collected a salary, and then they had overtime based upon the overtime laws. So anything about 2 hours above 40 was a time and a half, and then above that was double time. But then there were also labor laws around how much time they had to have in between. Like there wasn't even like a union contract. It was just like the labor laws which generated that. But then say for designers, the contract was basically basically laid out that the designers, like a year out in advance, were getting paid monthly. And then as you got closer, it switched to weekly. So as the production meetings start to ramp up. And as you got into, and as in builds and things like that, so you're checking in on builds and it's weekly. And then as you get into the tech, it was hourly. And it was a very interesting, I mean, it's not I don't know anyone here doing that. I'm not saying that is necessarily the answer, but it's in terms of like the possibilities are there, right? Like to think about different things to do. And then the other thing that I like to think about is, and again, I cannot find this. I will say, by the way, that back to the UK Entertainment Union has some really great resources on their site. But like there was an instance some time ago. I was organizing with a group of stage managers, and the stage managers said, all we want is to bring our work week down from 70 hours a week to 50 hours a week. Let that sink in for a moment. That was the thing, right? But they didn't think they could do it. Like, how is this work going to happen in 50 hours? So there was no way. There was a certain, we'll call it a martyr complex, as it were, in the way that we're conditioned to say that we got to do these things, have to happen in these timelines, right? Like, and that's the way. It's not that they were at fault, but this is how they've been conditioned to think. And one of the things that I think was very helpful in that gathering that we had was, I pulled out, again, I apologize, I can't seem to find the article, an article at the time of stage managers in Scotland who were negotiating collectively to bring their work week down from 35 hours a week to 26 hours a week. And the argument was that there was to cover travel time. And I think it's just interesting, just to plus one and yes and everything that my comrades have said. Just think of the ways that we can dream of something different and know that it can be different. Like, this tangible, something a good friend of mine has said before, like, one of the things that we struggle with when we try to dream and come up with these ideas is that it's so, we don't have a lot, if any, good examples of like a positive work environment. And first of all, that's kind of sad to think about. But the other thing is, like, I think they are out there. It's just that we don't talk about them. We don't hear about them. But if we can conceive of them, well, I mean, we're in the business of imagination, right?
And on that, we are almost at time, and I think a really great way to wrap it up is if the three of you could share, one thought, dream, hope, vision for the future of the industry. And it can be, a tangible something or a big, grand, seismic shift. Just one thing that we are envisioning for the future.
I believe in a living wage in our industry, and I think everyone wants that. And that's really my dream. In the next three years, we will get it.
I wanted to quickly call out, I know one of the links that was put up there was Yasmin Nair, the brilliant Yasmin Nair's article, and I want to just thank Yasmin Nair. I recommend it reading for everyone about art and activism. A dream for me is that we are able, that my dream and my hope for everyone is that we are able to connect with each other, not with everyone, like with, the people I just don't get along with. I'm sure it's true for everyone here, right? But like, you connect with people and build a connection with people in a as we work towards and achieve a world where we are all able to fully embrace our humanity and live in dignity in all aspects of our lives.
I'm a firm believer that anything historical, including trauma, requires a multi-generational response. I feel like I sit in the middle of multi-generations. And so I find myself saying this quite a bit, especially when I'm speaking with people who came before me. I stand on your shoulders. And I thank you for that. But I have a different view from up here. And I need you to trust that I see things differently. And I also need to recognize that those on my shoulders are seeing things differently. And so we need to respect and listen, And so I really want to, I know that this work is not new. I know that there are a lot of people that have been doing this for many, many years. And so I thank you deeply and personally. I thank you for that. And I thank you for letting me stand on your shoulders. And I just want to say to those who are getting ready to step up, I want to listen, because I know that your view, you will be able to see further than I ever will. And I want to help that view for you.
Yeah, I mean, yes to all of this. And, you know, it's been such a privilege to spend this time with you three and everybody here who's listening and commenting. And I'm really inspired by all the work that you all are doing and people, you know, beyond this Zoom room are doing. And my biggest hope for the future is that we all recognize the power that we have in our roles, whether that is a role that feels like it doesn't have a lot of power, or a very powerful role that our individual actions kind of, you know, build together to create the system, and we can really, you know, choose to use that power to uphold that system, or choose to use that power to build a better system together. So I hope that you know, this has been a insightful conversation for folks. Thank you.
Hey, thank you all so much. That was such a rich conversation, and like with those last words, I'm like getting all the feels. And so just wanted to invite anyone that wants to come on to video and just like let everyone know that we're here sharing virtual space and community with each other. You're definitely invited to do so. Thank you again to all of our panelists, and also Elsa for organizing this. Thank you to everybody who came and participated, both with your questions and your chat and your attention and all of the work that you're going to do, both small and large, to shift the direction of the field, even if that is just sharing these and some of the learnings that you have gathered in this space. And thank you to the amazing Wingspace community for all of the support and putting these together. So I hope that everyone has and thank you to HowlRound also for hosting us tonight in partnership with Wingspace as well. So I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Check back in with each other, with Wingspace, and we will see you again very soon.